I stood frozen in the middle of the reception hall, my cheeks burning as the wedding guests stared at me. The sound of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter had died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Did she really just say that? My heart pounded in my ears. Across the room, my brother's new bride, my sister-in-law only for the past hour, held the microphone with a triumphant smirk. She had just humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. A lump caught in my throat as I struggled to keep my composure. I could see the shocked faces of distant relatives and family friends turn toward me, some whispering behind their hands. I felt small, exposed under the twinkling chandelier lights, as if they were a spotlight searing my shame into me. My brother, the groom, stood at the head table with his eyes wide and jaw slack, clearly as stunned as I was. But he said nothing. No one did. I gripped the edge of my table, knuckles white. My 9-year-old son, who'd been sitting next to me, reached for my hand. His big innocent eyes looked up at me, full of confusion and concern. That simple touch nearly unraveled me. I refused to break down in tears here, not in front of my little boy. I swallowed hard, forcing a neutral expression on my face even as my mind raced. How did it come to this? This day was supposed to be about celebrating love and family, about gaining a sister, not being torn down by her. She had done it so casually too. One moment the bride, radiant in her white lace gown, was thanking everyone for attending. The next she made a joke, no, not a joke, a pointed barb, aimed directly at me. Her words rang in my head on a cruel echo. And to my new sister-in-law, I hope you enjoyed the free dinner. It might be the only time you're not paying for your own meal, since, well, no ring on your finger means no husband to spoil you. Laughter erupted from a few tables, mostly her bridesmaids and friends who tittered obediently. But a hush fell when nobody else joined in. My face drained of color, then flooded hot with humiliation. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear under the linen tablecloth. I glanced at my son. He looked back at me with a frown, clearly understanding that his mother was just insulted, even if he didn't grasp every nuance. In that charged silence, the bride's smug chuckle faltered. She hadn't expected the room to fall quiet. She twirled a strand of her dark hair and gave an exaggerated shrug, trying to play it off as just kidding. But her cold eyes flicked toward me, and I knew she meant every word. This was personal. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I lifted my chin and mustered a tight smile, trying to signal that I was fine, that it was just a silly joke. Inside, my heart was crumbling. My throat burned with things I wanted to scream back at her. How cruel and unnecessary that was, how I'd never dream of doing this to her. But I stayed silent for my brother's sake. It was his wedding day. It felt like an eternity that we all stood suspended in that awful moment. I could hear the faint clink of a fork dropped at someone's table, the rustle of an uncomfortable guest shifting in their seat. My son squeezed my hand harder. The bride opened her mouth, perhaps to move on quickly, perhaps to twist the knife further. I'll never know. Because that's when my little boy suddenly let go of my hand, took a step forward, and with all the courage that 9 years of life could muster, he spoke up. "You stop being mean to my mom," he shouted, his high voice clear and shaking with anger. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. My stomach flipped. Oh my God. My son had just stood up for me, right in front of everyone. For a split second, even the bride looked too stunned to speak, the microphone frozen in her hand. I sat paralyzed, heart pounding. How did it come to this? How it all started. Looking back on that moment, I shouldn't have been so surprised. The bad blood between my brother's bride and me didn't start on the wedding day. It had been brewing for months, perhaps even longer. I remember the first time I met Danielle, the woman who just became my sister-in-law and the architect of my humiliation. It was a sunny afternoon a little over a year ago. My brother James brought her to our family BBQ for the first time, beaming with pride. I was genuinely excited to meet the woman who had stolen my brother's heart. I greeted her with open arms and my brightest smile. "Welcome to the family," I'd said warmly, hugging her that day with sincere affection. Danielle's hug in return was lukewarm at best. She gave a polite smile, but her eyes flicked over me in a quick appraisal I couldn't quite decipher at the time. I thought maybe she was just nervous meeting her boyfriend's family, so I tried not to take it personally. But as the afternoon wore on, I noticed she would often respond to my friendly questions with curt one-word answers. If I complimented her dress or tried to include her in conversation, she'd nod and then promptly turn to talk to James or someone else. At first I wondered if I was imagining things, maybe I was coming on too strong, or she was simply shy. But even my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen at one point, eyebrows raised, whispering, "Is it just me or does James's girlfriend seem to have a bit of an attitude?" I wasn't the only one who felt the chill. That day set the tone. As James and Danielle's relationship got more serious, I kept hoping we'd grow closer, or at least more comfortable with each other. Instead, the rift only deepened. I heard snippets from my brother about how Danielle felt judged by our family. Each time he shared this, I was baffled. We had welcomed her wholeheartedly, bending over backwards to make her feel included. I realized eventually that her feelings were largely directed at me. For reasons I was slow to understand, Danielle saw me as a threat or rival, rather than a potential friend. Perhaps it was because James and I were very close siblings. Only 2 years apart, we'd been inseparable growing up, especially after we lost our dad early on. I practically helped raise James alongside our mom, so we have a bond that runs deep. I suspect Danielle noticed that bond and resented it. Little comments gave her away. One evening, a few months before the wedding, I dropped by James's house to return a book he had lent my son. Danielle was there. We exchanged the bare minimum of pleasantries. Just as I was about to leave, James casually mentioned how I'd helped him prep for a job interview. I'm a corporate recruiter, so I had coached him through mock questions the night before. Danielle's reaction was a thin smile and a clipped tone. Isn't he lucky to have his sister always swooping in to rescue him? The words themselves could have been neutral, but the way her voice dripped with sarcasm made my stomach clench. James cleared his throat awkwardly and tried to laugh it off, saying, "Hey, she's always had my back." Danielle just shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. Later that night, my brother texted me apologizing for Danielle's comment. He explained she'd been feeling like I doubted her ability to help him, that maybe I was intruding on their life. Intruding? I was stunned. I never tried to intrude, I was just being a supportive sister. Nonetheless, I resolved then to give them more space. I limited my advice to James and stopped dropping by unannounced. Perhaps, I thought, she was just insecure about her place and needed reassurance that I wasn't competition. But giving Danielle space only seemed to make her despise me more. As the wedding planning kicked into high gear, I found myself increasingly sidelined. I had offered early on to help with anything they needed. Addressing invites, designing centerpieces, anything. Danielle fixed me with a tight smile and said, "Thanks, but my bridesmaids and I have it under control." Fine, fair enough. The bride runs the show. I respected that. Honestly, I was a little relieved, thinking maybe our earlier friction would ease if I wasn't involved in planning. I contented myself with looking after my son and preparing for my small role on the big day. James had asked me to do a short reading during the ceremony, a Bible verse in honor of our late dad. I was touched and practiced diligently to get it just right. Then, a week before the wedding, James called me with an awkward tone. He said that the reading I was supposed to do was being cut from the ceremony. "The schedule is too tight," he murmured, clearly unhappy about it. I was disappointed but said I understood. Still, a nagging feeling told me this had Danielle's fingerprints all over it, not just a scheduling issue. There were other little slights. At the rehearsal dinner, I arrived with my son and discovered we weren't seated at the table with the bridal party or immediate family. Instead, we were placed at a back table with some of James's co-workers I barely knew. I didn't want to make a scene. It was just seating. After all, but I saw my mother's face pinch with confusion when she noticed my placement. Midway through the dinner, Mom quietly switched seats with me, insisting I take her spot next to my brother. She patted my hand and whispered, "This must be a mistake." I nodded, but deep down I suspected it was no mistake at all, just another way for Danielle to keep me out of the way. Throughout the rehearsal evening, Danielle was all smiles and charm toward everyone else, but her eyes flashed with irritation whenever I was in her periphery. I tried to compliment her whenever I could. "You must be so excited, you're going to make a beautiful bride," I said at one point, honestly. She responded with a curt thanks, then immediately turned to chat with someone else, as if I were invisible. I felt like an unwanted guest at my own brother's wedding events. What truly stung was how Danielle interacted with my son. She didn't bother to hide her annoyance whenever he was around. My little boy, being 9, was well behaved but naturally a bit energetic. At the rehearsal, he accidentally bumped into Danielle while playing with another kid. He immediately apologized, cheeks red, but she snapped at him loudly, "Watch it, this is not a playground." The room fell silent for a moment. My son looked at the floor, mortified. I rushed over, placing myself between Danielle and my child, and assured her he didn't mean any harm. Danielle just pursed her lips and walked away, muttering under her breath. James pulled me aside later and quietly apologized for his fiancée's temper. He explained she was just stressed about the wedding. I bit my tongue and nodded, saying I understood. But the way she had scolded my child, it took every ounce of patience not to snap back in that moment. For the sake of peace, I kept quiet. As I tucked my son into bed that night, the night before the wedding, he asked me in a small voice, "Mom, why does Aunt Danielle hate us?" Imagine your child asking you that about someone who is about to become part of your family. It broke my heart. I smoothed his hair and told him that Aunt Danielle was just nervous about the big day and didn't really hate us. He seemed unconvinced, and frankly, I didn't entirely believe my own words either. The wedding day showdown. The wedding day arrived, beautiful and breezy. I hoped against hope that all the ugliness would be left behind at the rehearsal, that today Danielle would be too happy to hold on to any grudges. I put on a brave face along with my silk bridesmaid dress. Yes, I was technically a bridesmaid, though I felt like the afterthought bridesmaid. Danielle had included me nominally, but I wasn't asked to join the bridal party's morning photos or preparations. So I spent the morning helping my mom with last-minute tasks and making sure my son was dressed in his little suit and tie. Despite everything, I was determined to be there for my brother. Seeing him before the ceremony, nervously adjusting his cufflinks with a goofy grin, my heart swelled with love. James gave me a quick hug before we lined up to walk down the aisle and whispered, "Thank you for being here. It means a lot." I squeezed his arm and smiled. "Try to stop me," I whispered back, winking, pretending like nothing was wrong. That was our silent pact. We both knew Danielle had been difficult with me, but we wouldn't let it ruin his day. Or so we thought. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Thank goodness. I walked down the aisle with my little bouquet, eyes straight ahead, feeling Danielle's gaze on me as I took my place up front. When Danielle glided down the aisle in her gorgeous gown, I genuinely felt happy for them. She looked stunning, and James was outright crying happy tears at the altar. I even teared up seeing my little brother so in love. For a brief moment during their vows, all the resentment and drama fell away, and I hoped, truly hoped, that this marriage would mark a new beginning. That maybe once Danielle felt secure as James's wife, she'd let go of whatever bitterness she held toward me. After the I-dos and a triumphant kiss, the guests cheered and we moved to the reception hall, a lovely banquet room bedecked with fairy lights and spring flowers. I tried to stay optimistic. My son was excited for cake and dancing, and I twirled him around on the dance floor during the lively songs that kicked off the reception. For a short while, I almost forgot the tension. I laughed as my boy attempted some clumsy version of a waltz with me, and guests smiled at his antics. Even Danielle and James were busy greeting people and taking photos. They didn't cross my path much during the first part of the reception. But of course, peace was short-lived. The first hint of trouble came during the dinner toasts. Our mother gave a beautiful, tearful speech welcoming Danielle to the family. I raised my glass, smiling genuinely as Danielle dabbed her eyes, apparently moved. Next, the best man, James's college buddy, told some goofy stories. All normal. Then, unexpectedly, James himself took the mic and asked the guests if he could say a few words about the best sister in the world. I froze in surprise as he beckoned me to join him. He hadn't mentioned this plan to me at all. Nervously, I stepped up. James put his arm around me and in front of everyone thanked me for being his rock and for always supporting him. He even mentioned our dad, saying I had stepped up after we lost him. Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged my brother. It was a heartfelt, unscripted moment. The guests gave a gentle round of applause. I caught a glimpse of Danielle during this impromptu sibling tribute. She was standing just off to the side, clutching her champagne flute very tightly. Her smile had gone paper thin, eyes narrowed ever so slightly. In hindsight, that was the moment I think something snapped in her. When James finished, he handed me the microphone and whispered, "Your turn, say something." I hadn't prepared a toast, but I couldn't refuse my brother on his big day. So I spoke, voice trembling at first. I congratulated the couple and then, looking at Danielle who forced a smile, I said earnestly that I was so happy to officially call her my sister. I kept it short and sweet, maybe a minute tops, ending with a light-hearted joke about how James used to be terrified of ghosts as a kid and now he's brave enough to live with Mrs. Boo. A playful pun on her new last name Boone. It wasn't the best joke, but people chuckled and it lightened the mood. I handed the mic back, relieved to be done. James gave me another side hug and thanked me, while Danielle gave a tight-lipped grin that looked more like a wince. Dinner was served and I thought maybe we were through the worst. I had navigated the day so far without drama, and if Danielle could just hold it together, we'd all get through this gracefully. My son was happily devouring his meal beside me, and I finally allowed myself to relax a little, chatting with an old family friend at our table. Then came the part of the evening I dreaded, the bouquet toss. I'd always found it a bit silly, especially as a single woman in her 30s, but tradition is tradition. The DJ announced all unmarried ladies to the floor. I hesitated, but a couple of younger cousins cajoled me into joining. Why not? I thought. It's just a bit of fun. A gaggle of women gathered on the dance floor, laughing and jostling. I hung toward the back of the group, not particularly keen on catching anything, just clapping along with everyone else. Danielle stood a few yards in front of us, her back turned, poised to throw her bouquet over her shoulder. The DJ was hyping it up, counting down. I braced myself, half smiling. 3, 2, wait, Danielle suddenly said, lowering her arm and turning around to face us instead. The DJ's music screeched to a halt, and we all blinked in confusion. With an oddly sweet smile, Danielle spoke into the mic, her voice echoing through the hall, "You know what, I've changed my mind." She clutched the bouquet to her chest. Why should I just toss it and let chance decide? Maybe I should choose who needs this bouquet the most. My stomach nodded. The crowd chuckled uncertainly. The bridesmaids exchanged glances. This was unusual and I had a terrible feeling where it was going. Instinctively I started to edge backward, trying to slip out of the group of women. But two of the bridesmaids, Danielle's college friends, flanked me with friendly grips on my arms, like I was part of some joke I didn't yet understand. I couldn't escape. Danielle's eyes scanned the group theatrically, as if pondering deeply. I could see the mischief, almost malice, in her grin. She was enjoying this. Whom could really use a good luck charm in love? She mused into the microphone, then her gaze landed squarely on me. My blood ran cold. "You," she cooed, pointing directly at me. Her tone was dripping with faux affection. "My dear new sister." A few of the women around me gasped or giggled nervously. I shook my head slightly, trying to refuse whatever this was, but Danielle wasn't about to be deterred. She stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I was rooted to the floor, caught like a deer in headlights. Danielle extended the bouquet toward me, smiling as if she were doing me a grand favor. "I think you deserve a chance at happiness," she said, her voice patronizing. "After all, you're the only single lady in the family now, right? We must help you catch up." My cheeks burned. Part of me wanted to smack the flowers out of her hand, but I restrained myself. I managed a weak smile and whispered, "That's really not necessary." She wasn't listening. Before I could finish, Danielle practically shoved the bouquet into my hands. I heard a few titters from onlookers, but mostly there was an uncomfortable silence. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Danielle turned back to grab the mic from the DJ for the second time that night. With me still standing there awkwardly holding the bouquet, she announced, "Congratulations. Looks like the only way she'll get a wedding of her own is by divine intervention, folks. It was as if the temperature in the room dropped. Some people laughed, a couple of Danielle's friends, one groomsman, mostly those who didn't know me well. But many others gasped or stared at her in disbelief. I even heard my grandmother utter, "Well, I never," from a corner. I was mortified. I could physically feel the humiliation washing over me, starting from the roots of my hair down to my toes. Danielle patted my shoulder in an exaggerated show of affection, then added with a sugary smile, "Just kidding, of course." Her nails dug subtly into my shoulder through my dress. That's when I knew this was absolutely deliberate. She wanted to hurt me, to put me in my place in front of everyone. I somehow willed myself to laugh weakly, dropping my gaze to avoid all the eyes on me. My vision blurred with tears I refused to shed. My throat was tight. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. The bouquet trembled in my grip. As Danielle's cruel laughter echoed lightly, she leaned into the mic once more, clearly unable to resist twisting the knife. "Enjoy the moment, dear. And hey, enjoy the free dinner. Might be the only time you're not footing the bill yourself." That line landed with a thud in the crowd. A few people actually said, "Oh my God," under their breaths. My brother looked like he was about to intervene, but was frozen in shock and embarrassment, torn between his wife and me. I caught his eye and saw in his face pure horror and apology. I couldn't take it anymore. A tear escaped despite myself. I remember the room starting to spin as my humiliation reached a fever pitch. The lights, the faces, Danielle's smirk, it was all a blur. I just wanted the floor to swallow me up. And then through the roaring in my ears, I heard a small shaking voice. "You're a mean lady." Time seemed to stop. I turned to see my son standing a few feet away from our table, his little fists balled at his sides, his face red and determined. He must have followed me onto the dance floor area when I was dragged up for the bouquet toss, and I hadn't noticed. Now here he was, confronting a bride, an adult, in front of 100 people. He glared at Danielle, trembling with emotion. "My mom is a good person. She's the best person I know," he shouted, voice wavering but loud. A collective stunned silence fell. Nobody quite knew how to react. Danielle stood there, mic in hand, mouth open in shock at being yelled at by a child. She looked around as if expecting someone to rescue her, but everyone's attention was now on the little boy bravely taking her to task. Hot tears pricked my eyes, but this time not from shame, from pride and an overwhelming surge of love. I wanted to rush over and scoop him up, to tell him he didn't have to fight this battle for me, but I was frozen, afraid that moving might break the magic of what was happening. "She doesn't need your stupid flowers or a husband," my son went on, voice cracking with anger. "She has me and Uncle James and Grandma and Grandpa. We love her. So you can keep your bouquet." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests actually cheered quietly at that line. I saw one of James's friends cover a smile with his hand. My son's chest was heaving. I could see how scared he was, his eyelashes wet, his stance rigid, but he stood his ground. He pointed a finger right at Danielle and said with emphasis, "You're the only one acting ugly at this pretty wedding." For a moment I thought I might have actually heard the sound of Danielle's ego shattering. A stunned ooh rolled through the guests, the kind of sound people make when someone's been roasted. And roasted she was, by a 9-year-old. Then came the clapping. It started with a couple of people, my cousin and aunt, then more joined. A wave of applause for my little boy, who had said what every decent person in that room was thinking. Poetic justice had come in the form of a child's honest outrage. Danielle's face went through a rapid series of changes: disbelief, anger, embarrassment, and something like despair. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. There was nothing she could say. How could she justify what she'd done, now that it was laid bare by a kid with no filter? "James," she finally hissed into the mic, her voice low and urgent, as if to call my brother to her side. But James was already on the move, and not toward her. He came straight to me and my son. As he reached us, I snapped out of my trance and knelt down, gathering my shaking boy into my arms. My son finally released a sob as I hugged him tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay," I whispered, my own tears flowing freely now. Tears of relief, gratitude, and yes, triumph. James crouched and put one hand on my back and one on his nephew's shoulder. "Hey buddy," he said softly to my son, his voice thick, that took a lot of guts. "Thank you for standing up for your mom." I looked at my brother, and he looked back with eyes full of apology and emotion. I gave him a slight nod, telling him I didn't hold him responsible for this mess. Behind us, Danielle stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, all eyes on her, and nowhere to hide. The applause had died down, and an awkward hush settled. The DJ, perhaps in a bid to cut the tension, stopped the background music entirely. The silence was intense. Our mother, was the next to move. She stepped up beside Danielle, and gently but firmly took the microphone out of her hand. "Thank you everyone for your love and support," Mom said to the crowd, her voice steady. "Why don't we all take a moment to enjoy some dessert, and give the couple a little breather?" Ever the gracious hostess, my mom signaled for the cake cutting to start, essentially diffusing the audience. As people turned their attention to the waitstaff who rolled out the wedding cake, Mom gripped Danielle by the elbow and led her off to a corner of the room, away from prying eyes. Danielle went with her, head bowed, utterly deflated. I stayed kneeling on the floor with my son in my arms. He was still crying quietly into my shoulder. I rubbed his back, whispering soothing words. My own heart was still hammering, but I felt an incredible lightness. The weight of humiliation had been lifted by my son's bold defense. All that remained was the emotional rawness of the confrontation. I became aware that many family members had formed a sort of protective semicircle around us, blocking us from the view of any gawkers. My father was there, patting my son gently on the back, and telling him, "It's all right now, sport. You did good." Even a few of Danielle's relatives approached, offering me awkward pats and murmuring that they were sorry I had been treated that way. In their eyes I saw genuine sympathy, and in some, a bit of shame for not intervening themselves. A few minutes later, my mom reappeared at my side. Danielle was nowhere to be seen, likely gathering herself in the restroom or outside. Mom stroked my hair and asked quietly, "Are you all right?" I nodded and gave a shaky smile. My son had calmed down and was now just clinging to me, face buried in my neck. The cake was cut and served without fanfare. People were mostly speaking in hushed tones. The festive spirit had taken a hit, but an undercurrent of satisfaction ran through my family's side of the room. Justice had been served, in a way. Eventually Danielle emerged again, her face blotchy and eyes red. She had obviously been crying. James immediately went to her, and I watched from afar as they spoke intensely. Danielle glanced my way once, her expression a mix of remorse and resentment. I looked back blankly, not ready to feel pity for her just yet. They finished whatever conversation they had, likely a very difficult one for a wedding night, and then James gently led Danielle over to where my son and I were sitting. My brother's face was solemn, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Danielle wouldn't look up. She took a breath and in a voice that was barely above a whisper, said, "I'm sorry." It was unclear who exactly she was addressing, me, my son, my whole family, or all of the above. "I was out of line," she continued, her lower lip trembling. "I shouldn't have said those things." Everyone nearby was quiet, watching this exchange. I felt my son squeeze my hand. I cleared my throat. "It really hurt, Danielle," I replied softly, my voice gentler than I expected. "I've never wanted anything but the best for you and James." My words hung there. I wasn't exactly forgiving her, but I needed her to know how badly she'd wounded me. Danielle nodded, wiping a tear that escaped. James looked utterly heartbroken by the situation. I realized that as angry as I was, this was also the man I loved most in the world's wedding day. I had to take the high road, for him. "I accept your apology," I added quietly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Let's try to move forward from this." Danielle finally met my eyes. She looked relieved and equally perplexed by my grace. Without another word, she turned and hugged my son, the boy who had called her out. It was a brief, awkward hug, but I think in her own way, she was saying sorry to him too. My son stiffened at first. He later told me he didn't hug back. Haha, but he allowed it. The rest of the evening was subdued but civil. People danced a bit, conversations slowly picked up. Danielle mostly stayed at the head table with James, quiet and chastened. I remained with my son and parents, surrounded by a cushion of supportive family. We didn't stay too much longer. By 9 p.m., I decided it was time to take my little hero home. He'd had a long, emotionally exhausting day, and so had I. We slipped out after letting James know we were leaving. My brother embraced me long and hard, whispering, "I am so sorry. I just told him I loved him." I gave Danielle a nod as a goodbye. She mustered a small tentative smile in return. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale ending to the night, but it was something. On the car ride home, my son was quiet for a bit. I think the reality of what he'd done, yelling at a grown-up, essentially stopping the whole wedding reception, was sinking in, and he was worried he might be in trouble. I glanced at him in the rear-view mirror, and saw his brows furrowed. "You okay, baby?" I asked gently. He fiddled with the little necktie of his suit. "Mom, was I bad for doing that?" he said in a small voice. "I know it was Uncle James's wedding." I pulled over to the side of the road for a moment, because I didn't want to half answer that or be distracted. I turned to face him. "Look at me," I said softly. He lifted his teary eyes. "You were brave, incredibly brave. You stood up for what was right, even when no other grown-up did. I could never be mad at you for that. In fact, I am so proud of you." My voice quavered with emotion. He broke into a relieved smile, and tears filled his eyes again. But this time, I knew they were happy tears. I reached back and squeezed his hand. "I love you," I said. "I love you too, Mom," he replied, voice trembling. When we got home, I let him have a small bowl of ice cream, even though it was late, as a celebratory treat. We cuddled on the couch in our pajamas, and watched his favorite cartoon, until his eyelids grew heavy. I carried him off to bed. Just before he drifted off, he murmured, "Mom, I didn't want her to be mean to you." I had to say something. Fresh tears stung my eyes, as I kissed his forehead. "I know," I whispered. "And you know what? You stopped her. You were my hero." He was too sleepy to respond, already cuddling his stuffed dinosaur, and fading into dreams. But I saw the little proud grin on his face, and it warmed my soul. In the weeks that followed, the story of the bouquet battle, and the outspoken nephew, became an oft-repeated tale in our family, a cautionary legend almost. It was embarrassing in some ways, but it also led to honest conversations. Danielle wrote me a longer apology in a letter a week later, explaining that she had felt insecure about how close I was with James, and was terrified of losing him to his family. Her words revealed a lot of her own pain and fear. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made me understand that her cruelty came from a place of deep insecurity. Over time, I cautiously opened up to her efforts at reconciliation. "We're not best friends, by any means, but we are civil, even friendly at family gatherings now. She's working on her jealousy issues, and I've worked on reassuring her that I'm not a threat to her marriage. I'm just a sister who loves my brother." They even joke that my son will be an attorney someday, because he objected at their wedding. As for my sweet boy, he learned a powerful lesson that day about standing up to bullies, even if the bully is someone older and supposedly in charge. He also saw firsthand that telling the truth can change the course of events. He doesn't brag about what he did. He's actually a little bashful about all the praise he got from family, but I can tell he carries himself with a bit more confidence now. Looking back, it's ironic that the day meant to welcome a new family member almost tore the family apart, but maybe it was necessary. The slate was wiped clean in a dramatic way. Danielle could no longer pretend there wasn't an issue, and I could no longer pretend her behavior was okay. And in the middle of it all was a child's pure-hearted love for his mother, cutting through the pretense and hostility. I will never forget the sight of my little boy, standing there in his tiny suit, defending me with all the ferocity of a knight, protecting his queen. In the end, the bride tried to break me with humiliation, but my 9-year-old son had the last word, and that made all the difference.